When you hear politicians talk about trust and AI in the same sentence, does your heart leap or sink? Because for me, every time I hear another country's leader promise that technology will build a better life for all citizens, I have this reflex, one eyebrow raises, and somewhere in the back of my mind I start rehearsing my questions. It's not that I don't believe in progress, I most definitely do. It's just that I've learned to read those announcements as both promises and warnings. Today we're going inside one of those moments, a set of quiet, almost bureaucratic agreements between Canada and the European Union. Agreements that, if you believe the press releases, will define how entire societies relate to artificial intelligence. It sounds very dry, but behind the formal language is something much more urgent. Who decides what is trustworthy? Whose standards matter? And who gets left out of this new AI adoption blueprint? In this video, we're going to trace three currents: why trust is suddenly the hottest commodity in global tech, how Canada and Europe are building alliances to shape AI and who benefits from these blueprints, and of course the uncomfortable question, can any government really promise technological confidence in an age defined by suspicion and uncertainty? Let me ask you, do you actually trust your governments or tech companies with your data? I want you to be honest on this one. Do you feel like these agreements are protecting your privacy or just creating a new class of gatekeepers? Leave your answers down in the comments below. I'm curious to see if anyone still feels optimism about AI for good, or if skepticism is the default now. Just a quick personal note, my new book, Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Soft Lies, is finally out in the world now. It's more than just a guide to thinking more clearly. It's about finding calm and clarity in a world that keeps getting louder. If you've ever felt like I do, worn down by the noise and knee-jerk opinions and want practical ways to think things through, especially under pressure, I think you'll find it valuable. Or if you know somebody who could use that kind of support right now, it might actually make a thoughtful Christmas gift. There's also a 24-minute companion podcast that walks through the key ideas, plus a launch video and a special discount for subscribers, all linked down below. And one more thing, maybe you didn't know, but I'm a computer scientist and I have a PhD in the field. I'm working on a new course all about AI fluency, essentially making sense of the technology that's shaping the next decade. If you're interested in this space and want to help guide what I build, I'd love to have your input. There's a quick 8-question survey, just a couple of minutes to fill out, and your thoughts will directly influence the content that I build next. The links to everything are below. It would mean so much to hear from you. Thank you for listening, but now let's get back into it. Trust is a precursor to adoption and diffusion, a Canadian official said at the signing of this new AI memorandum. It's almost funny now how in 2025 the language of trust has become the language of power, where innovation used to be the universal key, the thing every country wanted to own. Now trust is the thing that is being manufactured, managed, and increasingly sold. Canada and the European Union, recent Memoranda of Understanding, are a masterclass in this new strategy, in my opinion. The documents themselves are very dry, agreements about standards, credentials, regulatory cooperation, the usual thing. They don't announce a single breathtaking invention or headline-grabbing initiative. Instead, they are obsessed with confidence. How do you get people to use new technologies, the document asks, if they don't trust them? And how do you get trust if people are already suspicious of governments, of tech, of the sense that the world is being re-engineered above their heads? In a way, I admire the honesty, honestly. There is no more pretense that citizens will simply embrace whatever is built. Those days are long gone. Instead, the politicians sound almost defensive in a way. Citizens need to know that their privacy is safe. Citizens need to know that their personal information is safe. That's what they were saying. But as an outside observer, I can't help but notice the word need is doing a lot of work here. People need to know they're safe, but that doesn't mean they actually are. To think clearly here, we have to hold multiple truths at the same time. On one hand, international cooperation really does matter. Global problems do need global standards. But on the other hand, every time trust becomes a product, you kind of have to ask whose trust and what is the price? When the G7 talks about AI adoption blueprints, they're not really talking about software, my friends. They're talking about the system of belief and who gets to design the system. Now, there's a quiet drama in the way Canada and the EU are trying to set the pace here. Listen closely and you'll hear it. When we align our AI standards, Canadian and European companies can compete more effectively globally. That's a good one. The translation is basically, we want to build a walled garden where our rules matter and others have to play by them. And if you're an ordinary person like me, not a regulator, not a lobbyist, you might actually wonder, does this actually protect us or just reshuffle who has power? Let's break it down together. On one level, this is the classic club strategy, right? The EU, with its history of aggressive privacy laws and digital regulation, wants to export its standards worldwide. Canada, facing pressures from the US and China, finds itself safer to anchor itself to the European project than to try to go it alone. We have a couple of videos on that one as well. Check them out if you're curious. Both sides talk about adoption, but what they really mean is alignment, a merging of rules so that companies know what to expect, and crucially, so that competitors have to jump through the same hoops. Is this good news? I think in some ways, yes. Without clear standards, you get a free-for-all, companies chasing short-term gains, data sloshing around borders, regulators always a step behind. Not the best idea. There's something quietly impressive about the idea that Canada and EU can interconnect our high-performance computing ecosystems, as they said, as if they're building not just new laws, but a physical network as well, a backbone for whatever comes next. But here's the edge as well. If you're outside of the club, you play by their rules or you don't play at all. And if you're inside, you might find that trust is less about protection and more about permission. You can do anything as long as you do it their way. That is where the comparisons matter, in my opinion. China's AI for surveillance, AI for power model is explicit. Nobody's pretending otherwise. The US's model is more move fast, break things, apologize later. That model has a certain chaotic honesty as well. Canada and the EU, in contrast, are betting on the soft power of standards. The idea that if you make the rules, you can shape the game quietly and permanently. Is it noble? Is it self-serving? I think it's both. But either way, it's a reminder that power in the AI age isn't just about who has the best algorithms, but it's also about who gets to decide what trustworthy even means. Now, I have a soft spot for many things, one of them being grand infrastructure projects. There's something audacious about trying to build systems that outlast the politicians who announce them, something permanent in that. But digital credentials, this is where optimism starts to fray. The agreements between Canada and the EU are not just about AI ethics. They're about the future of identity, in essence. They talk about making cross-border interactions easier and about creating systems that citizens can trust. But if you've ever had your personal data compromised, God forbid, or spent hours on the phone with a government agency, you know how fragile that trust really is. To their credit, these policymakers aren't promising magic. That's great. They acknowledge that people will only use these tools if they trust them. But here's the tension. The more seamless identity becomes, the more every action, every login, every credential, every digital handshake is tracked, logged, and potentially commodified. The more privacy is promised, the more the system depends on faith. Faith that regulators will resist the temptation to overreach. Faith that corporations will play fair. Faith that the next crisis won't be used as an excuse to break these rules. I keep thinking of Estonia, often praised as the gold standard for digital government. On paper, it works, a single digital ID used for everything from voting to healthcare to banking. In practice, it only works because the citizens believed in the system and because so far, God forbid, it hasn't been tested by a crisis big enough to shake that faith. The EU-Canada vision is, I think, less dramatic, but the stakes are definitely similar. Who owns your identity when it lives on a server that you're never going to see? Who audits the auditors when trust is manufactured at scale? Sometimes I worry that in the rush to make things seamless, we might actually lose the friction that reminds us how to be careful. A good critical thinker doesn't just ask what is efficient. We have to ask who benefits from this efficiency as well, and at what cost to autonomy. Now, if there is one thing that these agreements get right, it's that AI isn't just a tool, it's becoming an environment. The officials keep returning to this idea, and I'm very grateful for that. They're saying, and I'm quoting here, we have a lot to offer to attract the best talents in this world who say, I want to do top-notch technology research, but also do something with great purpose. As a former academic, I can definitely relate to that impulse. There's an almost missionary tone here, right? As if the real race isn't for patents or profits, but for meaning, for purpose, for making the world a better place. Canada and Germany in particular are pouring resources into what they call an ambitious program to anchor AI in public service, not just private profit. Supercomputers, foundational models, cross-border research networks, these are the new cathedrals, right? Built not for prayer, but for calculation. But there's also a kind of sadness, an admission that technology alone cannot supply a sense of belonging or direction. We want to use that technology for the best service of other people. Another quote. The hope here is palpable, my friends, but so is the anxiety. Because talent goes where it feels valued, but also where it feels safe. And as the world fragments, as we're witnessing right now, as supply chains break, as old alliances wobble, the promise of purpose becomes both a recruitment slogan and a survival strategy. If I'm sounding skeptical, it's because I've seen these cycles before. The big plans, the investment, the talk of ecosystems, and then in the quieter moments, the stories of the people who feel left out or overwhelmed or quietly alienated by systems that promised inclusion but delivered something much colder. Maybe this time will be different, and I really hope so. Or maybe, as with every technology since the printing press, the real work will be done not by the architects, but by the critics, the watchdogs, and the citizens who refuse to outsource their judgment. And if you're finding this analysis useful, consider subscribing. The House of L is a community for people who want to think clearly, ask better questions, and keep a sense of perspective in a world that doesn't always reward it. So, does trust come before adoption, or is it just the marketing gloss on a deeper story about control? I keep coming back to that question from earlier, my friends. Do you trust the architects of these new systems? Do you believe that aligning standards, creating digital credentials, and building supercomputers will actually serve the public, or just the next wave of insiders? Maybe there is no easy answer. There never appears to be one. Maybe this is one of those moments where a society has to decide what kind of risk it's willing to live with. The risk of moving too fast, or the risk of being left behind, the risk of trusting too much or too little. What I know is this, though: to stay awake, we have to actually hold space both for hope and for skepticism. We have to resist the comfort of slogans, responsible AI, better jobs, trustworthy systems, and instead ask the harder questions. Who defines the terms? Who enforces the rules? Who pays the price and who reaps the reward? Because in the end, trust is not just a word. It's the architecture of our shared future, fragile, provisional, and if we're lucky, just strong enough to carry us a little further. If you want to see how all of this connects to the next great divide, check out these other videos that I've linked here as a natural next step for a deeper dive. Until next time, stay critical, stay curious, and remember, the future is built not just on code, but on the stories we tell ourselves about whom to trust.